Welcome back to another episode of What Did the Patient Say with Doctors Dana and Lauren Brindisi, sisters and owners of Carolina Functional Neurology Center. We are bringing you inside information from real conversations we have with patients on a daily basis. We get asked the same questions and want to spread the truth on health and healing because we believe everyone deserves to know the answers.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to What Did the Patient Say? This is a very special episode that we're both really excited about. We have decided to talk to you guys about what our 3 favorite books are. Now, we get asked this question a lot in the office. Patients get really excited about learning about their brain and, the types of conditions they may have. So I feel like I get asked this question a lot. I get really excited. I got a bunch of books out in the waiting room, and usually I'm like, I don't know, what are my top 3? But it depends. But Dana and I both sat down and decided just generally what are our top 3 favorite books we would recommend. And right now what we're going to do is actually all together, we're going to call them out and see if we picked any of the same books or not. So,
okay, should we announce all of them like 1, 2, 3 immediately and then we can go in and talk about the book? Or should we do like book number 1 and we both say one?
I think book number 1 and say it.
Okay.
If they're different, we'll talk about them. If they're the same, then.
But your number 1, I guess, might be my number 3. I didn't really rank them in order of like how much I like them. I was just like, these are my top 3 that I really like.
Rank them in order of how much you like them.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Book number 1.
Okay.
1,
Okay.
2, 3.
The
Book
Brain
of
That
Joy.
Changes Itself.
That's my number 2.
Oh, see, I
That's
told
my
you.
number 2.
Okay. All right. You talk about yours first, and then
Okay.
we'll both talk about The Brain That Changes Itself.
Okay. So my number 1 is the Book of Joy. This book is really special to me. It talks a lot about mindfulness. And while it's not, neuroscience specific, they definitely, touch on aspects of neuroscience and how it relates to things like spirituality. So in the book, the author actually gets to spend time with the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who are both friends, and they're both getting older in age. And it's really interesting to either read or listen to an audiobook. And they just go through, talk about all these different topics and questions about spirituality, about how to live a really good life. And it really is the Book of Joy. I mean, I love it.
Yeah.
Dana's read it, definitely chime in here, Dana. I've read it several times and I've listened to it several times because I just feel like it does truly bring me so much joy and so much appreciation just for life. And we talk about this with patients a lot. I mean, your mental health is a huge factor in your overall well-being. I mean, mental health is health. So the way I describe it from like a neuroscience perspective with patients is I say something like moving your hand, that's a motor output of your brain that will change your brain. So are your thoughts. Your thoughts are just a different form of a motor output that are going to change your brain. And really, really important because we all have chatter inside our head all day long. So the way I phrase it to patients usually is, I know what you're telling yourself every day, right? But that has a huge impact on your outlook on life and your outlook on your recovery. So books like this can be really, really useful in terms of cultivating aspects of things like mindfulness and being really present in a moment. And that's really important because a lot of things, when we talk about aspects of anxiety or depression, it's usually we're kind of swinging on this pendulum of I'm worried about something I did in the past that was a problem, or I'm scared about something that happened in the future that's a problem, or I'm sad about something that happened in the past, or I'm sad about something that could maybe happen that hasn't even happened yet. And when we learn to cultivate these aspects of mindfulness, you start to be much more present in what's going on in real time in your real life, instead of letting that chatter and those aspects of our mental health cloud us from like living our full potential and truly living our life. And I think when it comes to that and the idea of neuroplasticity, which we're going to talk about in a little more detail shortly here, is that this is a huge factor. Our mental health is so, so important to that. And I think that's important for anybody, whether you're dealing with neurological issues, whether you're a healthy person trying to live the healthiest life you can. I mean, your mental health is one of your top priorities. And I think this book really helps helped me put me in a really great mindset. And so I just,
yeah, I think what I really liked and I took from it is, obviously, they're both coming from a religious background and obviously two very different religions. But I think what they touched on a lot was, what do we focus on a regular basis? And I think when we talk about what that means from a neurological perspective, and we kind of talk about this a lot with our patients, is our brains are wired for negativity. It's a survival mechanism, right? So that we are not putting ourselves into a dangerous situation. Now, living in the modern world, we face all of these things that, wire us or they don't wire us, we're already wired that way, but they kind of perpetuate that negativity. And it's almost like we have to try really hard to focus on the more positive things. And I think that they both, from their own perspective, really focus on that, obviously grounded in religion, but they really do focus on, and, I think it's so awesome to see them kind of come together and say like, well, this is our perspective, right? And then, oh, this is our perspective, but their underlying kind of message that they have is just to really focus on positivity. Not that you ignore the negative, but you can acknowledge it without allowing it to consume you, and really focus on that. And, I think that's super important for us and for our patients to understand that, we are wired to be negative. It's survival. Our brains are doing that to help us so that we survive.
Our sympathetic nervous system.
We also have to, but even beyond that, right? Like we talk about like the different networks in the brain, like the salience network and the default mode networks and all of these things that like we're really starting to understand on a better scale. And it's just like, it doesn't translate into our modern world, right? And it's like, we've got to really work harder nowadays to make sure that we don't allow ourselves to kind of go down that rabbit hole, because our brain is going to do that for us anyway. And we've got to figure out how to kind of unravel ourselves and keep things up here, even when they may not be. And again, reiterate, like, it's not that we push all of that stuff aside. And I think that the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop do a really good job of saying, we don't ignore that. We don't not have bad days. We don't not exhibit anxiety, or we never feel sad, right? They're not saying that. They're saying that we choose to acknowledge those feelings. We choose to acknowledge those situations that are causing those feelings. And then we work really, really hard for them at their faith, right? To make sure that those feelings and those negativities don't consume them and put them in a bad. That's one of my favorite things about the whole book. It's
reacting less to things that are out of your control.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean not acknowledging them. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. I think that was a good one for book number 1.
Yeah.
Okay. So mine was The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. And this is really like the, one of the, I think like the pioneering books talking about neuroscience and, what that actually means, and the fact that we can actually change the brain. And it just, he does such a good job about talking about real life stories and kind of tying that into, what does that mean from a neuroscience perspective, but more in terms that we can all understand and relate to, whether you have a neurology background or not. I've met so many people in so many different, not even in the office, but friends or acquaintances or people that I've run into, and, everyone's like, oh, what do you do? What do you do? And so many times when I tell people, I do functional neurology, I work with patients that have neurological conditions, we do rehab, all of this. So many people have been like, hey, do you know the book, The Brain That Changes Itself? I'm like, yeah, it sits at our coffee table. I love it.
Yeah, I love that one. I read that book actually way back in undergrad when I started studying neuroscience, and it just blew my mind because even in undergrad, we were just starting to scratch the surface and talk about the ideas of neuroplasticity, which have been around way before. But the reality is it was kind of debunked in science for a long time. And we thought just your brain was your brain. Like there's no changing it. It was pretty much staying the same or going downhill. And a lot of scientists discredited that idea. So in institutions, I mean, I was one of the first classes that even had the privilege of studying neuroscience at.
Was that a book that they recommended that you read, or was that just something that you read on your own?
I found it on my own. I just remember going, Barnes and Nobles and roaming around, and it was like, yeah, just one of the first times, now you see all these brain books all over the place.
Yeah.
But I started seeking them out because I was just getting really, really fascinated by the brain. And that's where just my whole love and appreciation in the first place for neuroplasticity even came in, was actually reading this book.
Yeah.
So it's one that I recommend almost to every patient that seems, inquisitive and inquires, like, I want to learn more. What should I read? I go, this book fully describes,
blows your
what
mind.
we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really the reason, we get to do what we do. And so it's readable for people. Like you said, even if they don't have a neuroscience background, he does a really great job. And then he's got a second book too. I don't know if that's on your list, but
I don't even know what it is. What is it?
The Brain's Way of Healing.
Oh, I need that one.
He's got a second one. It's called The Brain's Way of Healing. And so in the second book, he actually breaks down like clinical aspects of treating patients from a neuroplasticity perspective. I didn't know you didn't know. Yeah, you got to read that one. And everyone else should too.
All right. I think The Brain That Changes Itself needs to be, and the Book of Joy. It needs to be on everybody's coffee table. You got to read it. I actually, you've inspired me. I'm gonna download the Book of Joy on Audible. I want to re-listen to it because it does. Just even talking about it makes me happy.
Yeah. Yeah. See. Yeah. Definitely.
Okay. We moving on. Book number 2.
That was my number 2. So you go.
Okay. Well. Okay. Okay. This might be your number 3. I feel like it might be. Okay. My book number 2 was The Female Brain.
I put that one
by Luann Brizendine. Okay. Cool. So The Female Brain.
Good one.
This is not a book for only women.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? This is a book for everybody.
Yeah.
If you are a woman, you know a woman, you have a significant other that's a woman, you have a kid that's a woman,
friends that are women,
whatever.
Your neighbor's a woman.
Yeah. Your dog is female. I mean, whatever.
You gotta know.
This book was so fascinating to me because it started out, it's talking about the brain, and it's talking about neurodevelopment and hormonal changes that happen specifically in female women, and kind of how that translates into how we act at all different ages, right? And you read it, and as a woman myself, I was like, oh my gosh, like this just made my whole life make sense. Like, I understand why we're not all the same, right? And, from a hormone perspective, and we do a lot with our patients from hormone perspectives and things, but it just goes down some of these rabbit holes, and it talks about every aspect of life. And it just, I thought that it was really interesting when it talked about specifically about pregnancy and kind of the hormone changes, obviously, that we all know that women go through when they are pregnant and postpartum and like all of that. what I found super fascinating, and I had no clue that this happened, and maybe a lot of you guys don't know that this happens, but actually after your partner gives birth, men have actual hormone changes that happen within their body. Again, kind of as a protective mechanism, right? Because in that moment, we're not concerned about reproducing, right? So it's like all of the male hormones kind of die down so that they don't have this big drive to then immediately go and reproduce more offspring. Well, the mom is recovering from just having given birth to a baby. And I'm like, oh my God, like, that's amazing. Like the human body's amazing. And the fact that like, I don't want to say the guy didn't do anything, but you know, he's observing this, but he's in the vicinity of everything that's happening, and his body's actually changing as well. I was like,
so powerful.
It's so powerful. It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
I think everybody should read it. I think it would make the world go round just a little bit easier.
I agree. One of the things that stood out for me in that book was when they talked about male versus female brains right after birth, and some of the things that women are pre-programmed with that boys actually aren't, or girls and boys aren't.
Yeah.
And the one that stood out to me was eye contact. So girls come out pre-programmed
for more, right?
They understand eye contact. That's a really important aspect of language. So if you're a parent and you have a boy and a girl, right, this is, read it before you have kids, because understanding that the necessity for eye contact for a developing female brain is so crucial in terms of their understanding of what's going on in their environment and their approval mechanisms in terms of understanding if what they're doing is correct or not. Whereas
and remind me, was it saying that the girls needed more eye contact?
Yeah, whereas as boys, and I can't remember the exact age range where that like kicks in for boys, but it's not right out of the womb, and it's right out of the womb for girls. And so it makes a lot of sense, right? When you like even just think about girls versus boys. I was in a book club and read this book. Yeah. And so it was fun just kind of like going back and forth, all women, and we're talking about this book. And some of the stuff, we were just laughing, and it makes so much sense. Because that's something that I feel like just as women in general, right? When you look at relationships, it's like, are you even listening to me? You're not even looking at me.
Look at me.
Eye contact, please. Because that's something we were just automatically pre-programmed with, and it's actually more of a learned behavior for men.
Makes sense.
Lots of sense.
So cool. All right.
Read this book, make the world go round better, please.
Yeah, read it. Read it.
Okay.
Because in general, female brains are more complex from a neural network perspective than male brains are. So,
our
do a little research.
Yeah.
I always tell my dads if they have a girl, I'm always like, you need to read this book. Like if you have a daughter, you have to read it.
Read it. Yeah.
It is imperative for your health moving forward that you understand what's happening here.
For everybody in the household.
Yeah, it's only going to be better. Okay. Oh my gosh. Last book.
I don't think they'll be the same. So let's do them one at a time.
No, let's do it. Let's say it at the same time and then. Come on. This is our. Okay. Ready? One, two, three. Why isn't my brain working?
3-day effect.
Oh, okay. Not the same. All right. You go first.
Okay. So mine is called the 3-day effect. I actually listened to this on audiobook, which I would highly recommend because there's actually real footage of some of the things that happen. But the author, it is basically broke down into 3 different, situations. But she goes out with various groups, which I don't want to give it all away, but she goes out with various groups and they actually look at what happens to people's brains when they spend a certain amount of time out in nature. And so she's just in 3 different scenarios. I should have
picked a different book. I like this book that I picked, but I have one more that I just want to put that information out there.
I have a fourth too. We'll just throw them out there without saying too much about them.
Okay.
But it was just so cool. Just the whole, I don't want to give it all away because I just feel like this ties aspects of, you know, how we connect with the planet and how it actually changes our brains and our response mechanisms. And why it's called the 3-day effect is all the researchers and information she's kind of compiled over time. And she actually works with neuroscientists where they actually run EEGs and they look at the electrical activity coming off people's brains after periods of time out in nature. And it seems like there's some magical shift that happens after being out in 3 days.
So is it out in nature specifically, or like what happens if you go out in nature, all this changes, and then what if you like go to a concert for 3 days, or like you only like sleep and work at your computer for 3 days? Is it like, I'm asking this because when, you know, we talk about like the gut microbiome and things like that, it's like in 2 to 3 days, if you go from eating just a plant-based diet and then you go to a carnivore diet, it's going to change your microbiome very, very quickly.
Yeah.
I would think that like environmentally, probably the same thing would be happening.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't really talk about that specifically, but it's more like behaviorally. And then they use that, you know, like I said, in one of the segments, they talk about where they're actually out there and there's researchers running EEGs and looking what's happening with the electrical activity that's coming off the brain and how it changes over time. But they were also measuring other things like aspects of your autonomic system, like your heart rate and your blood pressure.
I'm sure nature made their autonomic system more parasympathetically favorable.
Yeah, after 3 days. Sometimes people were a little, like, it seems like there's this level of, because we don't really live out in nature like that. So you're camping and, you know, if you're not used to camping, there's probably variables. But something shifts and all these aspects of like more natural instincts and things start to kick in and people start to feel more comfortable out there. And then they just go into a whole bunch of detail about it.
Did they say anything about what happens like after the 3 days?
So
like what if you were there for 10 days?
They talk about more like lasting effects of doing that, like how long going out in nature for 3 days. I mean, she actually goes out and does a whole trip for a much more extended period of time. And at one point she actually goes out with a group and she camps by herself, which I thought was really cool. But another one, she's going out with, some really novice like campers and hikers. And then one of them, she actually goes with an entire battered women's shelter, and they sit around and have all these, really good conversations. And it just goes through the whole series of things. And
really neat.
It's really interesting because as the audiobook, she's not just reading the book. She actually has recordings of people she was involved with. So It's a little more of like an audio documentary in a way. And I love camping and I love nature. And I love neuroscience. So it just got me really, really excited about, people who are nervous about doing those things, but might have, who isn't excited to learn about their brain. I feel like it's a really interesting piece that most people find fascinating when they start digging into some information about the brain. And to be able to understand just even like a little bit of that impact and how, like, get out of your house, go even just lay outside in the grass, like disconnect from technology, listen to the birds, feel the breeze, just get outside, and it can have huge impacts on your overall health and well-being.
Yeah. Nice.
Backed by neuroscience.
All right. That's a good one. Okay. My last one, I picked this one because this one, again, kind of very accessible for people, very easy for people to understand. And I think that a lot of patients fall into this category. So my book was Why Isn't My Brain Working by Datis Karazian. Datis is a functional neurologist. He is like a functional medicine wizard. And this book, he goes into explain why so many people, and we talk about this a lot, right? They're being told everything's fine, everything's normal, you're all good, don't worry about it, nothing's wrong, go talk to your psychologist.
Yeah.
But you don't feel normal. And he goes into a lot of detail about why that is. And again, all backed by neuroscience, but it really explains, how and why our profession exists, and how we're able to help people. And it is very easy for people to understand, when they read his words. And I think that if more people knew about this book, more people would be able to seek appropriate treatment, because there's so many different people that are dealing with different symptoms that kind of fall under this category of like, why isn't my brain working? But everybody's telling me everything's normal, right? He has another one solely based on thyroid function. It's like, they're telling me my thyroid levels are normal. Why do I feel so bad? And it's like, well, you're kind of flying under the radar, and it really is a functional issue. And so I just think it's really cool that there's a full book out there dedicated to this population of people, and kind of explaining how we do what we do and why we see so many people get better when they go through treatment. So
yeah, I think that's a big part. I recommend those books a lot, because that's the conversation I have all the time with people. They go, I've been told everything's normal, I've been all over the place, but what I still feel terrible. Am I crazy? It's my mental health? And I go, well, it is in your head, it's in your brain. And this book can break it down in a lot more detail than we can maybe have short conversations with people about. Yeah, they can really delve into it and start learning some more of the details and start putting the pieces together. I mean, that's the whole reason we even do this podcast, right? Is we think everyone deserves to have this information, and that there's so many resources out there that we've, over time have uncovered, and we want to share with you guys, because this shouldn't be a mystery, and it shouldn't be, let's wait till someone has, or may not have, some severe pathology to take action. If you don't feel good, listen to yourself, and you're probably not crazy. Go talk to a functional provider and see if there's any other options out there.
Yeah, it breaks my heart every time someone tells me, I wish I would have found you, X number of years ago. I'm like, years, right? I mean, that, a couple weeks is too long, right? Let alone years. And I feel like, if more people kind of share this information, then more people are going to get the help that they need. So that is why I picked Why Is My Brain Working? Okay, I think we both have, this is a long podcast, so hopefully you guys are enjoying this. Obviously we've enjoyed it. We love sharing this information with you guys.
Tell our last ones. We won't talk too much detail.
Yeah, why don't you tell your last one? I'll tell mine. We'll give like a brief synopsis of what the book is about, not really get into any detail, and we'll take it from there. And if people like this episode, I mean, we've got a ton of books. So we'd be happy to share if you guys ever wanted to, have us like dive deep into a book and maybe do some more explaining. I think that would be cool too. We could definitely do that. Maybe pick apart some chapters.
Online book club.
Ooh, we could do an online book club. If you guys are interested, make a comment. Let us know. Oh my gosh, we could do an international book club. Yeah.
What's nice these days too, because again, a lot of our patients, they have difficulty, don't even have the energy to be reading, is most books are out on audio days. Yeah. So, there's a lot of ways to still absorb this information without having to sit down to actually read the information.
Yeah.
My last one that I wanted to put out there was The Power of Habits. Read that one? Or listen to that one?
I don't think I have. I have heard of it. I don't think I've actually read it though.
Okay. It's another one that I really like because it ties in aspects of neuroscience and understanding how our brain forms habits, but in layman's terms, but it throws in there, some little tidbits about neuroscience. So I feel like it's really applicable for people to read, and they start understanding how our brains wire the way that they do, and based on our experiences. So I say this a lot to patients. I go, our brains are just products of habit. So for example, we use a lot more energy when we're doing something new. it takes a lot more frontal lobe activity. Then the example in the book in one of the first chapters is driving to work, new job for the first time, or the first few times. So you're learning the route. You're very alert. You're following the directions. You're not missing, the turns and the street signs and all of that. And then eventually you take that route so many times that, sometimes you start daydreaming the whole way to work and you forget that you even got there. And he actually talks about, what really intrigued me about the book is that he actually talks about these pathways in the basal ganglia, that these feedback loops through the frontal lobe that start to help us form habits and take the load off of our frontal lobe. So we have more space in our frontal lobes to learn new things. And we're expending less energy doing the things that we've done so much of that become so habitual. So our brain just wants to form habits to save energy, to do more. And that's another thing I talk about with patients. I go, our brains want to expend the least amount of energy doing any task at hand.
So we talk about that too, because it is the way that our brain creates neuroplasticity, right? And it's like, it can be good and it can be bad, but it's like, the more you do it, the more you drive that pathway, the more you do that activity, the more efficient, whatever part of your brain that's being driven to do that, the more efficient it becomes. So it makes sense.
And this book breaks that down. It starts talking about addiction and, other habits, good or bad, right? And then kind of the take home is it talks about things you can do to start forming different habits, like different tips and tricks. And, you want to change one of your behavior of yours. Well, what are some tactics and ways in which you can actually do that? Nice. And then, of course, I love it because it adds actually the neuroscience, some tidbits of neuroscience in there to start understanding, okay, this is not just having this conversation about tips and tricks, but actually why it happens and why these things work.
Nice. Yeah. All right. That sounds like a good one. I'm going to keep this short and sweet because I know that this has been a long one. My fourth book is called The Body Keeps the Score. This book really hit home for me because I would say a significant portion of the population of patients that we see have had some sort of trauma in their life, whether it's physical trauma, emotional trauma, sexual trauma. It's consistent, and we see patients that really are pretty sick. And so when I read this book, the basis is all about trauma and different types of trauma, and how your nervous system and your body kind of holds on to that. And they do functional MRIs and they talk about all of different aspects of, what's happening in the brain. And, how people are responding differently to trauma, which I thought was very interesting, again, because they're looking at the neuroscience of it. It's not a super sciencey book though. Like, they really do a good job of explaining everything. But if you've ever had trauma in your life, I mean, we all have little traumas. This is talking about a little bit more significant trauma. But if you've ever had trauma in your life, or someone that has trauma in their life, I think this is a really, really super important book for everybody to read so that you can understand. And also, if you're dealing with chronic illness and you've had trauma in your life, I think it's really important for you to understand how much of the underlying, ability for your body to develop this chronic disease might lie in the fact that you had this trauma. Whether you address it or not, some people are still kind of fighting that. It was very eye-opening to me. It was just very relevant because I kept seeing, and we ask about this on our intake forms, and I just kept seeing and being surprised the longer I was in practice at how many people have experienced significant trauma in their life. And then to see that, really become very apparent in our patient population. And I kept saying, I was like, this is not a mistake, right? Like, there's something to this. And until I read this book, I didn't fully understand what that was. I just knew that I saw it clinically. I saw this on people's paperwork. I understood that they were really sick. but now I know how big of a connection that is, right? And that trauma could have been a childhood trauma, and now they're in their 40s or 50s and they're really chronically ill. And yeah, it is very good. And I think it's really important for people to kind of understand, not only for themselves, but, you know, if they're dealing with somebody that has had trauma that maybe now is chronically ill, to understand how big of a role that's playing. So I hope you guys liked this podcast. It's really fun to kind of share some of the things that we enjoy outside the practice. Obviously, super nerdy. We always bring it back to the brain. But that's our world, that's our lives. And fortunately, we love it. So thanks for letting us share this. If you guys liked it, please comment. If you guys want more books, let us know. If you guys want to do a book club, we're into it. But as always, you know, these episodes are being driven by the people that are listening to them. So if you guys have any specifics that you want to talk about, I think we're probably going to be gearing up to have a meeting about what these videos are going to look like for next year. So get your comments in, let us know what you want to hear about. Like, subscribe, follow us on social media. Super big news. I know you guys have all been waiting for it. Carolina Functional Neurology Center is now on TikTok. So please follow us. Give us a like. Maybe we will be TikTok famous one day.
Fingers crossed.
It's been our dream.
All right.
All right, guys, have a good night. It's almost bedtime for us today.
Yeah.
So thank you for everything, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.